I'm Stu Chait. I'm a watercolor artist, specifically abstract watercolors. Today is the launch of a series of videos that I'll be putting online in the coming weeks and months to talk about my approach to watercolors. It doesn't have to be just about my abstractions. It can be about realistic art, plein air, whatever you want to paint. I'm going to give you how I would get there. So today we're going to start with just a basic watercolor kit. The foundations to put a successful kit together: paper, brushes, and paint. Watercolor paper comes in different weights: 90 pound, 140 pound, 156 pound, 300 pound, and 400 pound. The more weight, the thicker the paper. Your entry grade, 90 and 140 pound, tends to be pretty thin. I don't like to go less than 140 pound. 90 pound just doesn't give me a lot of thickness, a lot of paper to work with. I actually prefer most of the time to work on 300 pound. This is almost like a cardboard. I've never had the opportunity to work on 400 pound. I've seen it. It is very, very stiff. There's different manufacturers of watercolor paper. Some of the ones that I have here are Canson, which is a French manufacturer; Arches, another French manufacturer; Fabriano, which is made in Italy; and a new one that I've come across, Two Rivers, which is made in England. Watercolor paper comes in different colors. Both of these are an example of a natural white. It is what I prefer to use because to me it gives you the most authentic look to a painting. It also will come in bright white, which almost looks like a piece of Clorox bleached paper. It is very, very white. It doesn't look authentic. It doesn't look true to my eye. Your eye may be different. It's just not a color that I like to work with. There are different textures to watercolor paper. There's cold press. Both of these are cold press. It has kind of a pebbly orange peel type of surface to it. It gives you a lot of opportunity to work paint in different ways. Hot press, which is very smooth, and rough, which is very, very textured compared to the cold press. I'm not a big fan of hot press. I've never really been able to get my paints to work successfully on it. Cold press to me is a good compromise between the hot press and the rough. Watercolor paper comes in different forms. It comes in pads. It comes in blocks, which are actually glued up all the way around, such so that you can actually work the paper here. Where in a pad, you would take the paper off the pad and put it onto a board. Also comes in rolls. Rolls are very large and very expensive. What I tend to do is start out with a 9x12 pad or block and work my way up to 22 by 30 sheets. And again, I like to work with the cold press and the 300 pound and a natural white. This is my paper of choice. Mostly it has been Arches, but recently again I have come across the Two Rivers, which is an excellent paper. Watercolor brushes, just like paper, come from student grade up through professional grade, and they can get very expensive. Brushes should be bought based on how you're going to use them. And while that might sound obvious, some people buy brushes because they look cool. So there's different types of brushes and they have different functions. You have large area brushes. Essentially, the brushes should be sized according to this area that you're going to be painting in. If you're going to be painting this entire sheet of paper, you want to use a large brush so that you can get in and get out. You don't want to be using a small brush and painting all day long. It leads to a lot of problems. There are flats, and flats come in different sizes. 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch, the large area brush that I just showed you. And flats are very good for carrying a nice straight edge. There are rounds. This is a number 10 round. This is a rigger brush. And rounds are good for getting in and doing detail work. When a round brush gets wet, it gets very, very pointed. Rigger brushes originally were used for painting the rigging lines on ship paintings. You have drop-in brushes, and drop-in brushes are such that they carry a lot of paint, a lot of liquid, and you load them up, and what you will do is you will squeeze them onto the paper instead of painting it on the paper. It's a different technique. It's one that I like to use in wet-on-wet approaches. It will give you different effects. It's a different way of looking at a watercolor paint. And lastly, are cheap brushes. These are brushes that might cost $1 or $2 a piece. They're synthetic. They're probably made out of nylon or polypropylene. And when I am mixing my paints up in a small container, and I'm in there and I can beat that brush up, I don't care that I spent $1 or $2 on it compared to several $100s on a sable brush. So I call these beater brushes. And I have several of them. I use them for mixing my paints up, and I don't care if they get beat up. And now the cool stuff, paint. Watercolor paint comes in different forms. It comes in dry shapes called pan sets. You probably had a pan set when you were smaller. These are tube paints. They are the type of paints that I like to use based on the approach that I use. Wet-on-wet techniques is the only way that I believe that I can get the consistency and the depth of the pigment. Paints come in student grade all the way to professional grade, just like the paper and the brushes. You're going to see companies called Cotman and Grumbacher as your student entry grades. They cost $1 to $5 a tube, depending on the size and the color that you're looking at. You'll go up to Daniel Smith, Holbein, Winsor Newton, and Schmecka. And these are truer pigments. They're more expensive because they have more pigment than filler. It costs up to $20-some a tube. These colors are based on working around the color wheel, and I'm going to put up a screenshot in a second and you'll see how that works. But essentially what I have picked here is burnt sienna, which is a brown, a warm red and a cool red, cad red and alizarin crimson, a warm yellow and a cool yellow, cad yellow and lemon yellow, a warm blue and a cool blue, phthalo blue and ultramarine, and then finally phthalo green, which is a cool green, but I can get a lot of warm greens out of it. When you take a look at the screenshot, you take a look at the color wheel, you see how these choices were made. I can make any color in between these, and I don't need to buy a purple, I don't need to buy an orange, I don't need to buy a sepia brown, because I can make them, and they have more body in them because I have mixed these colors together and the chemical properties of these paints are working together as well. Take a look at your paint selection, decide what you want, what works to your eye, but work around the color wheel and make sure that you're putting complementary colors in your palette, because it's the best way to round out your color choices. So where do we buy all this cool stuff? My first suggestion is to always support your local art store. If you don't have one, Joann's or Michael's or similar chain store usually has pretty decent selection. If you like to buy online, Dick Blick, Jerry's Artorama are two places. Another place that I would recommend is Rochester Art Supply, fineartstore.com. I'm fortunate enough to live in Rochester. They're my go-to store. Their service, their selection, their customer service is second to none. They're a national art dealer. Take a look at them. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. Today's video is just to talk about the foundations of a watercolor kit. Paper, brushes, and paint. Can't make a watercolor without them. There are a lot of other items that are strictly optional based on what your approach will be going forward. I teach wet on wet. You may not like it. You may want to go wet on dry, which is called glazing. A lot of items that are particular to my kit, which I will show you, are based on certain techniques. And all I'll be doing is just adding another tool to your toolkit. And how you use it is your choice. So until next time.